Hello everyone and welcome to another video on the Toliss Airbus A321, and today we're going to look at how we deal with engine failures in the cruise. I am a real-world Airbus pilot, so hopefully this brings some extra context to your home simulation, but as always it's not for any real-world use. So we're sat here in the cruise. We're flying from Athens to Heathrow. We've recently reached our top of climb at flight level 340, and let's see what we'll do if the engine shuts down up here at this high altitude. Before we do get started, I'd just like to say a few things about today's video as we're dealing with failures. This is, again, I can't stress enough, not for any real world use. There are some differences with the Toliss Airbus and real life that we will see as we go through the video, and obviously different airlines will have different procedures, so this doesn't reflect any individual airline procedures. Also, we're looking at engine flameouts today, primarily because that's what the Toliss lets me select, and they are different from engine failures with damage. I'll talk about that in another video. It's quite an important distinction between the two. So when I talk later in the video about relighting engines, that sort of thing, that's only something you consider if you could confirm it hadn't had damage. An engine flameout would simply be it's stopped igniting the fuel, but there's no actual damage to the engine. So if you can get the process started again, then you can carry on. The engine is working for you. So that's just something to consider. Later on in the video, there'll be a lot more for pilots to consider, including diversions, fuel burn, performance calculations, differences now we're on a single engine. Although the Airbus FMDC is very good, we'll see that the Toliss one misses a few of these numbers out as we go. So I hope this gives you a deeper insight, but it's not comprehensive. So before we look at this exercise, a few things to note. We're at flight level 340. If we look at our FMGC cruise page, our recommended maximum is 366, our optimum 345. So yeah, flight level 340 is probably pretty reasonable as to where we would be. We're about 1,200 nautical miles from Heathrow. This is not the maximum flight level. 321s can go up to flight level 390, but at this weight we are at 77 tons. Yeah, it's pretty reasonable. We've got 12.2 tons of fuel on board. Just to give you an idea of our route, we're sitting here. We've recently taken off from Athens, and if you look at our route, we haven't got any. I can see there is some terrain, but the Alps are further away, and we can see here something that as pilots would always keep an eye on is any terrain on our route. So we keep an eye on the MSAs as we're going, because we need to know if there's terrain beneath us that stops us from being able to descend as we please. So for here, there is no terrain beneath us. So if we have an engine failure at the moment, we will do the standard strategy. So there's two versions to an engine failure in the cruise. One is the standard strategy, where we simply descend and get ready to try and relight the engine. And there's another one where we try and minimize our descent in order to stay above the terrain. So in the standard strategy, as we'll see, we will just get our descent going to keep the airspeed up, and that means that the airplane is ready to relight better. It gives you the windmilling speed, so the engine is turning over in the wind appropriately fast enough for us to relight it quickly. I say quickly, I mean in a reasonable time. With the obstacle strategy, that's not the priority. The priority is not descending into the terrain, so we do something slightly different that involves less drag. So what are we going to do if an engine fails right now? That's the key part to all this, really, isn't it? So how would we find out? Well, you'll get a swing. We'll see a few things change, but pretty quickly we'll start to lose airspeed, because the reality is we can't stay at this flight level on one engine. The plane is perfectly flyable on one engine, but we can't stay this high. It's too high. So we're going to see the speed start to reduce, and the airplane will be trying to maintain in outcruise flight level 340. So that's a pretty dangerous situation if we let it go on too long. So what do we do? Well, first of all, we're currently in climb thrust, as you see here, but the engines can go around all day on MCT, maximum continuous thrust. So the airplane will ask us for levers MCT, because it will detect an engine failure and it will say, please set the thrust levers to MCT, and the auto thrust will still be engaged, but now the engines can use more thrust. The climb thrust is a lower rating than the maximum continuous, so we'll set those to MCT. Then we're going to turn off the auto thrust. In the real airplane, I would do that using these little red buttons. They don't seem to work here, so either you'll have your own keys assigned, or you can press this button here to turn off the auto thrust. And that way, we will just have the engines running at MCT, so we'll no longer have auto thrust up to MCT. We will just have MCT thrust set, because we've put the thrust levers there and we've turned off the auto thrust, which is what we're going to want, because we're going to need all of that thrust just to reduce our rate of descent. Then we're going to select our speed. So it'll be decimal 78 up here, where it's decimal 77. 78 or 300 knots, either of those. We obviously can't do 300 knots because we're too high. So as you climb, that becomes a conversion to a Mach number. As we descend, 78 will slowly increase until it's 300 knots, and then we'll convert to 300 knots. After that, we'll consider our heading and our navigation, and then we need to consider our flight level. So we will select this flight level window to something below us. We can refine it later, but probably somewhere in the flight level 200 to 300, somewhere there. And then we will pull for open descent. So a few steps there. They're not really memory items, but they're something that pilots want to know because they have to happen in a fairly quick order to make sure we don't get too slow. So let's have a look at how that would happen. Okay, so here we are in the cruise, and let's see what happens. I'll bring up the PFD. I'm not going to go into the proper fault handling for now. That will be another video, but we'll just look at dealing with this particular failure. So there we go. We've got our engine failure. You recognise it as a click, engine fail, master caution. So lever MCT, we'll take the levers to MCT. We'll turn off the auto thrust, so we get MCT thrust applied by the airplane straight away, which is there. Now I need to begin my descent. So let's wind that down and pull, open descent. I would go to my MCDU and check for the engine out maximum, but I don't have it, sadly, in the Toliss. And then we would start to set this to 0.78. So let's get down. I imagine it'd be somewhere between flight level 200 and 300. It's a shame it should appear here. This would be engine out recommended max. But because the airplane does know it, the FMGC is very clever, it can recognize it and give you the information you need. If it didn't, you can look it up in your QRH. It would have the performance numbers you need in there, or your airline specific manuals will. So as I said, we're going to go to 0.78. That was slightly out of order. You can see how quickly it can happen. I don't think in real life it would happen that fast. I've seen on the Toliss forum there's a slight issue with the way the drag works above 0.75, and also with the way the engine failures are working, where it goes instantly to maximum drag as if the engine was just windmilling. So it does happen slightly faster in X-plane, but there you go. So now we're descending and we're keeping 0.78 or 300 knots, which we will convert to as we descend. We would have done that earlier, but I wanted to get the descent going because we needed to not get into our low speed, and that's why I don't think it would happen that fast. So now we would run through our ECAM actions and so on, which involves basically getting ready for the engine to relight. You can see here that it's windmilling in that wind, and that's why we stay at this speed. So I said we're going from 0.78 to 300, so I can now convert. So I press speed Mach and 300 knots. And because we're in open descent, the airplane is trying to it would be in thrust idle, and then it would just fly on the pitch to maintain 300 knots with idle thrust. But we're cheating slightly because we've forced it to have MCT thrust. Oh, bring that back there. We forced it to MCT thrust, so it is going to have a lower rate of descent than it would normally in an open descent, which is not how we would normally fly, but it works in this situation. So what are we waiting for now? Well, we can run through some of the ECAM now and start thinking about our decision making, that sort of stuff. So where might we go? Are we going to divert? Probably. We're certainly not making it back to London like this. And then we want to get down to that engine out ceiling, which still, yeah, it's just not being displayed, sadly. So assuming it's flight level 240, where we could maintain one engine level flight, what are we going to do as we get there? So because we have to get ready for that. If we stay like this, with MCT thrust in open descent, eventually there'll be enough excess thrust on this live engine as we get lower. There'll be enough thrust for it to level us off. So what you'll see is our rate of descent reduced to 0, and then it may even start to climb slightly, or certainly it will level off and sit at its altitude. And we want to go to a specific flight level, so we aren't going to let it do that. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to carry on heading down to our engine out long range cruise ceiling. As we see this vertical speed reduce, it will eventually reduce to 500 feet per minute. Once it does that, I'm going to pull vertical speed and force it to fly at 500 feet per minute. And then I can simply re-engage the auto thrust and leave these at MCT. And that way, the airplane can control its thrust to maintain the flight level I've asked for. So we're going from a situation in the cruise and in this part of the descent where we don't have enough thrust to stay where we are. So we're just reducing that deceleration and that rate of descent. to a point where we have control again and we can moderate the thrust to maintain our flight level. So hopefully we'll see that happen soon. What I can do is I'll just show you running through these ECAM actions, but like I said, there'll be another video on failure management. So let's have a look. Engine 1 has failed. We already agreed that, and it's gone into its wimmeling. So we'll put the engine mode select to ignition. Thrust lever 1 to idle. Thrust lever 1, that would get confirmed by the other pilot to idle, and then no relight after 30 seconds. Well, the FADEC has been trying to relight the engine. It would automatically, especially in a flame out situation. I know it won't relight because I failed it in the simulator, but it's certainly something you would try, and that's why we're sitting at this speed, because as you can see, the N1 and the N2 are spinning around quite fast. 30%, that's more than it would spin around on a normal startup. So that would, all it would need is the fuel and the igniters to sort of kick in and work, and you could have a nice relight there. If I was to cancel the fault now, I imagine this engine would relight almost immediately. You can see there's a fuel flow, which is probably what's causing that trail outside. So no relight, it hasn't relit, engine master 1 off. And we confirm that with the other pilot as well. Then we should see that fuel flow drop to 0. And if I have a look outside, there we go. We have lost our trail, which was the fuel being chucked out as it tried to relight. Right, engine 1 shut down. Yeah, we have. So fuel crossfeed would go on. Now that is depending on the airline. Some airlines will just turn it on, some won't. That's up on our fuel panel. And we have our crossfeed. If we turn it on, it becomes open. And we'll see here. Now the airplane can feed either fuel into this engine that is live. Something to note though, there's actually, in modern ECAMs, it won't let you just do that. You'll need to consider if there's a fuel leak, because there could be a problem with the lines on this side. Let's say there's been some damage to it, and we don't want that fuel disappearing out the side. So we would actually be very careful that there is not a fuel leak before we open any crossfeed. So I'm actually going to leave it off, because that probably wouldn't have been assessed just yet. As I said, this is not proper ECAM handling yet. This is just me just getting through it so that we can move on to the next part of this situation. So it's become clear that actually 240 was probably too high. The airplane is still descending even at MCT thrust. It can't maintain 500 feet per minute. So let's see what happens at 220. Okay, so now we've reached 500 feet per minute. I've still got MCT on my live engine, and it's just hovering at 500 feet per minute, going down to, I've changed it to flight level 210 now. It's pretty low actually. I'm surprised how badly it's doing. So let's do what we said. We're going to pull vertical speed 500 feet per minute, and there it is, vertical speed 500. And now I can re-engage the auto thrust, and we get speed, auto thrust, and it wants to leave us to MCT, which they are. I noticed earlier it did a toga lock when I wouldn't have expected it to. Let's get that set. There we go. Okay. This is interesting. So he's gone to idle thrust, even though I've asked it for a speed of 300 knots. Not ideal. Let's see why it's doing that. Let's try and wake it up. Right, let's put it to toga thrust. I don't know what speed it's targeting. Very strange. There we go. Well, after a few bits of trial and error, we've managed to get it to MCT speed. I'm not sure what happened there. I wouldn't have expected that, but I've got the thrust lever set to MCT. We've got MCT thrust, and now it should target that speed. You can see how much energy we lost even in that little bit of time there. The alternative would have been to just increase our rate of descent or something, just keep the airplane flying. But there we go. So it's going to take it a while now to regain that energy. And then we would level off and go into our troubleshooting and decision making, but we are now safe at a flight level the airplane can handle on a single engine. So let's have a look at what would happen if there was terrain beneath us. So this time we're going to pretend there is terrain beneath us, perhaps the Alps or something even higher, and let's see how we handle it. So what's different? Well, we're simply going to go to green dot for our descent. That's essentially the only difference for this one. Once again, here we go, engine failure, ding, let's get it sorted. So master caution engine failure, levers to MCT it's asking for. So they go to MCT, auto thrust off. This thrust lock shouldn't happen, but I'm just going to trick it. There we go. And now I'm going to select the speed to green dot and pull for open descent. I should then confirm the flight level, but as we know it isn't working, so let's put it back down. We know 210 was what we were using last time, and let's see if that works. And master caution is there. Again, I think it happens slightly slower in real life, although it is still something that you need to be ready for at any time. And now I just need to set this to green dots, which at the moment is 7.2. So you can see here we have a lower rate of descent than we did last time. You'll be able to compare the two directly, but it's a much more gradual process, because last time we accelerated the airplane effectively from 0.78 up to 300 knots whilst we were descending in order to get enough airflow through the engine to windmill it. But this time we're just sticking to green dots because it allows us this lower rate of descent. And if there was terrain beneath us, obviously, that would be a very useful thing. We don't want to have to descend down into it. Once we're past the terrain, then we could consider what we're going to do, whether we're going to accelerate and try and relight it, that sort of thing. So what we would do now, you can see again that we've got this fuel flow going in. It looks like it's trying to relight that engine. So we would run through our ECAM actions at some point once we're happy that the airplane is definitely safe and flying as we want it to. So let's do that. Engine mode select to ignition. And what we'll do actually is I will just have a look at relighting it for you. So if I cancel the failure, you'll probably see, there we go, it actually, if the airplane has its chance, it will just relight that engine on its own. I haven't had to do anything. Maybe putting that to ignition was all it needed, but the FA deck is going to try and sort out that engine for you. But there we go. Assuming the engine had failed and we carried on, then we would continue the descent just as we did last time, converting to a vertical speed as we got lower. And then we could level off at our new cruise altitude. So that's it for today. I hope that's been of interest for you, something slightly different. I'll do some more videos on engine failures. We'll look at after takeoffs and so on in upcoming videos. So do please stay tuned. Thank you very much for watching, and see you again soon.